231. We're talking about the very last chapter in 231, which is so weird, but here we go. I'm going to share screen. So we're talking about the spinal cord now. Still in nervous system, talking about the spinal cord. Here we go. So the functions of the spinal cord, here we have, you can see the spinal cord, you can see the numbering of the spinal cord. Spinal nerves coming out of the spinal cord are very similar to the vertebrae and how the vertebrae are named. So you have one extra cervical spinal nerve. So it's C1 to C8 instead of 7. And that's because you have a spinal nerve that comes out superior to the vertebrae. Okay, so you have one coming out prior to C1 vertebrae. So C1 to 8, T1 to T12, L1 to L5. Okay, super important. We're going to talk about nerves and stuff like that. So spinal nerves carry sensory information and motor information to and from the CNS, the central nervous system. So central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord, okay? The spinal cord helps maintain homeostasis with quick reflexes and also is kind of like a highway. It's like a highway, right? It's a bunch of axons that are traveling back and forth, carrying sensory information up to the brain. Hey, there's touch, there's pain, there's itch, there's temperature, there's sight, there's hearing, there's smell. So all that sensation stuff is going up to the brain. So that's like a highway, the spinal cord. And then also motor information is coming down like, hey, I want to pick up that drink. I want to run down the street. All of that information to contract those muscles. We just did that, muscle physiology. All of that, all these axons, all those action potentials, they're going to be traveling along the spinal cord. Okay, here we go. So, as you can see on page 1, we're going to talk about meninges. You might have heard of things like meningitis. So meninges protect the spinal cord and brain. You'll do brain in 232, but they protect the spinal cord and brain from really from kind of everything, from blood even. You can't have blood near the nervous system, near the nervous tissue. They die. Neurons die in blood. The meninges protect the spinal cord and brain. And there's 3 layers of meninges. I like to think about pad from inside out, from deep to superficial. There's pia. There's a meninge called pia mater. Oops, where is it? Right here. Pia would be sitting right here. Oh, here are the meninges. They're down here. Okay, so the pink is pia. It's sitting right on the spinal cord. Arachnoid's next. So pia is PIA. So pia, arachnoid, and dura. Oh, sorry, it's pad. Why am I saying pia? It's pad from the inside out. So pia, arachnoid, and dura. And you can see dura is nice and thick. If we could do a dissection together, you would see how thick it is. Really thick connective tissue. So those are your meninges. And most of them are made from connective tissue. Yep, you can see that on here. Okay, there's also spaces between these meninges. So you can see there's a subdural space, there's an epidural space, and we'll see that later. The subarachnoid space has cerebrospinal fluid. So you're going to talk more about cerebrospinal fluid in 232, but I will say it's not blood. It's clean. It's much cleaner than blood. That's all I'm going to say for now. Okay, so we've got these nice meninges covering the spinal cord. You can see that the spinal cord looks a little bit like a butterfly on the inside, right? I'm going to use a different color. That's that butterfly. This is what we would call gray matter. That gray matter is mostly nuclei, mostly the nucleuses of the cell bodies of neurons, okay? Or unmyelinated neurons, okay? So that's gray matter, and then white matter is on the outside, So that's your spinal cord. That's the cross section of it. You can see it. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we need to learn about on the outside of that spinal cord, which we will talk about as we go through. Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Oh, CSF means cerebrospinal fluid. That's just a abbreviation. You're going to talk more about that in 232 right now. You just need to know, hey, it's clean. It helps cushion and protect the spinal cord and brain. Okay, now the spinal cord, enlargements of the spinal cord. So we're looking at the spinal cord all the way down, C1 to L5, all the way down, okay? And there's a couple places where it's going to look kind of big. One of the places is called the cervical enlargement. It's from C4, it's from C4 to T1, I believe, yeah. And the reason why it's a little bit larger there is because there's a whole bunch of nerves that are going to innervate your arms and your arms here. So we call that the cervical enlargement. The next enlargement is the lumbar enlargement. That's T9 to T12. So thoracic, and it's right here. And what do you think that innervates? The legs. So these are nerves that are going to be going down and innervating the legs. So there's a lot of nerves coming out here. Nice. There's another, these are all kind of markings. There's the conus medullaris right here, and that's the termination of the spinal cord. So the spinal cord ends around L1 and L2. Believe it or not, it ends. So we call that the conus medullaris. The cauda equina or cauda equina is kind of a fan of nerves. So we've terminated the spinal cord. These are all nerves down here, and it's kind of a fan of nerves. And cauda equina means horse's tail. So these nerves are coming out and they're innervating and they're innervating. This is below the end of the spinal cord. These are all just nerves. Okay, nerves are bundles of axons. All right, what else do we see on here? Spinal taps and saddle blocks or epidurals. They're all they're all done. If you know what those are, I won't ask you about them, but they're all done lower than the termination of the spinal cord because we don't want to paralyze anyone. So what we'll do is we'll take drugs for a spinal block. We'll put anesthesia down here. We'll use the epidural space. If you've seen those spaces before, I'll show you the spaces later, but we'll use that space to put the drug or to take a tap. Now a spinal tap would be to see if there's something going on in the cerebrospinal fluid. We're going to take a little tap, a little bit of it. And that would be in the subarachnoid space. And we'll show you those spaces later. But we want to do it below the termination of the spinal cord. Why? So we don't paralyze you. You can get a headache if we hit a nerve when we're down here, but you're not going to be paralyzed. Whereas up here, when there's damage to the spinal cord, as you know, at this point, we can cause paralysis, as you know. Okay, what else do we want to say before we move on? Very good. I think the cross section might be next. Perfect. Okay, so we're still talking about the spinal cord, and I'm kind of on the top of page 3. I'm looking for the cross section. Okay, so this is the top of page 3. We're going to look at the cross section of the spinal cord. Just again, we're looking at anatomy. A lot of this is very much overlap with lab. So here's the cross section of the spinal cord. And you can see where the gray matter is located. It's located on the inside, looks kind of like a butterfly. The white matter is on the outside. There's a bunch of anatomy here. The posterior side has a sulcus in the very middle here called the posterior median sulcus. The anterior side has a fissure, which is a much deeper sulcus, and this is called the anterior median fissure. The central canal holds this white spot right here. I'm going to put it in pink. This hole here, that holds cerebrospinal fluid that's traveling around the spinal cord and brain. What else? Horns. Horns, you can see, this is the posterior horn. Okay, so that's just, it's kind of like a thing sticking out, a gray matter sticking out. There's a lateral horn sometimes. You won't always see a lateral horn. I know that's kind of confusing. Sometimes there's a lateral horn. There's always a posterior horn, and there's always an anterior horn. So they kind of just stick out. areas of gray matter that stick out. Good. What else? The gray commissure. Commissural fibers, you're going to see this in 232, but commissures are things that span across something. So the gray commissure, so it's gray matter, it spans across both sides of the spinal cord. Right there is the gray commissure. Okay, what else? Good. Okay, so I want to bring up something. Anything white here these are myelinated axons, okay? So they're bundles of axons. And we call these things tracts when they're in the CNS. And the reason why it's different in the CNS versus the PNS we would call them nerves. Tracts are a little different because they're only tracts, individual tracts will be carrying information it's very organized. They'll be carrying only axons that are motor or only axons that are sensory, okay? So tracts are very organized, whereas nerves, which are going to be out here, okay, out in your PNS, like out in your extremities, nerves are mixed, meaning that they can carry both sensory, they do carry both sensory and motor information. They've got information that's coming in and information that's going out, okay? So tracts are only found, they're white, and they're only found in the CNS. What else? Very good, tracts. I'm at the bottom of page 3 here. White matter, central canal, gray matter. So these tracts, we're not going to name the tracts in a 200 level biology class. We don't name, there are tracts going specifically to your cerebrum in your brain. There's specific tracts. We're not going to name them, but we are going to say if the tract, white matter, if it's heading up, it's sensory. And if it's heading down, if it's descending, it's motor. So we can call those tracts either sensory tracts or motor tracts. And if you want to use ascending and descending, you can. That's fine. I tend to call them sensory and motor. Okay. Okay. Very good. Moving on. I actually do want to show you this one. Again, a lot of anatomy in these. Here's the vertebrae, right? Here's the spinous process of the vertebrae, and here's the body of the vertebrae. So you can really see the vertebrae here. And you can see the spinal cord, how it sits in nicely in your vertebrae. That's why your vertebrae are shaped kind of funny. What you can also see are spaces, you can see the meninges. And so let's go ahead and take a look. So the pia would be covering right over the spinal cord. Then you're going to have the subarachnoid space. Now the subarachnoid space is in blue, and it is the thing that holds cerebrospinal fluid. So it's pretty big space. Next would be the subarachnoid meninge, the arachnoid meninge, which is here, kind of light blue. In between the arachnoid and the dura is the subdural space. Actually, that space is so small that you actually wouldn't see it. Like if you were in surgery, you wouldn't see that space. So we don't tend to talk about it that much. Then you've got the dural layer of meninge next here, kind of an orange. And then you have this epidural space, which has fat in it. And that's where we put like drugs and things like that. So that's a nice one to see all those spaces and the meninges. The other thing you can see on here are the exiting and the entering of sensory and motor information. So sensory information will be coming in and traveling in to the spinal cord. Okay, so this is sensory information, like itch, tickle, temperature, that kind of thing. And it travels in, where it travels in, this is called right here, a spinal nerve, okay, where that information is coming. There's also motor information. We'll do this in a second, but there's also motor information that's traveling out, okay, out to the body, out to the peripheral nervous system. that will also travel through the spinal nerve that's right here, okay? So I just want you to start to get to know these terms that I'm using. It's almost like a different language, isn't it? Lots of terms, but you're doing good. Okay, spinal nerves. Spinal nerves, remember middle of page 4, C1 to 8, okay, T1 to 12, L1 to 5. There are sacral nerves. These are nerves. They're coming out of the sacrum, S1 to 5. Okay. We did talk about what gray matter is and what white matter is. This is kind of nice because you can really see a good cross-section of the spinal cord. There's a couple things on here that we didn't name, but we did name a lot. So you've got the butterfly, which is the gray matter. This is all gray matter. The central canal. Posterior horn is at the back, posterior. Anterior horn is at the front. Those are gray matter. You've got the sulcus and the anterior median fissure. Now, a couple things that we didn't name. So we said there's a spinal nerve right here and a spinal nerve right here, and they're coming, you know, they have information coming in from the body, PNS, they have information going out to the PNS, motor and sensory. Okay. Now you can see this little piece right here coming in to the spinal cord. All right, so the spinal nerve over here is in blue, and I'm going to do a different color here. But the spinal nerve is going to split into something called a root. This is a root. The root only carries sensory information. This is a sensory root. It's called the posterior root, and it carries sensory information from the body 100% of the time, because roots are not mixed. They only carry one type of information. On the other side, you have motor. You have a motor root. This root carries only motor information out, and then they come together in the spinal nerve in the blue, okay? So roots only carry one type of information. This is motor information coming out, and then the posterior root is sensory information coming in. So the ventral root is in pink, and it carries what? Motor. The posterior root is in red, and it carries what? Sensory. I think we are good there. So we just did roots on the bottom of page 4. We did at the top of page 5, we have one more thing we need to find on here, which is called the dorsal root ganglion. What is a ganglion? We did go over this in lab, but let's do it again here. So a dorsal root ganglion, right here, it's the dorsal root, but it's a ganglion. A ganglion is a bunch of cell bodies, a bunch of soma, a bunch of neurons, they're nuclei, okay? All of those things were the same thing, okay? A bunch of those in a spot in the PNS, okay? So a ganglion is a bunch of nuclei, a bunch of cell bodies, okay, neuron cell bodies in the PNS, the peripheral nervous system, okay? So this is a big famous one, the dorsal root ganglion. These are the sensory neurons. They have their little cell bodies, and that information is coming, sensory information is coming into the spinal cord. Beautiful. So dorsal root ganglion. Okay. Now we're good. Common spinal nerve, that's number 2 on page 5. Common spinal nerve would be right here. I just called it the spinal nerve, but the common spinal nerve would be on both sides, right? That's where the roots come together. All right. And you have these common spinal nerves. You have C1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, T1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Keep going with me. L1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are you with me? And S1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are your common spinal nerves. All right. We're going to build on that. We're going to build on this piece that the roots going to the nerve, we're going to build on it. And we're going to keep going out into the PNS. Okay, so we're going to keep going out. We're building. Let's see. spinal roots and ganglia. All right, that's fine. So here's the spinal cord. So just another way to look at it, right? We have this is where they come together, where the roots come together is the common spinal nerve. We have the dorsal root ganglion or posterior root ganglion is fine, either one. And then we have and that carries sensory. And then we have the motor, which is the ventral root coming out. Okay, good. Now down here, what is this down here? This is, what are we looking at? Oh, this is the dorsal root ganglion. All right, I haven't seen this slide before, but that's fine. There's a whole bunch of cell bodies in that dorsal root. They're just showing you that there's a whole bunch of cell bodies in there. All right, cool. We already talked about that, we're okay. I think there's just like a moment to stop and say, what is meningitis? And meningitis is very serious because you have some bacterial, itis means inflammation. So you have some kind of bacteria, you have something in your meninges, you might die. Because remember, nervous tissue will die off. So meningitis, and now there's also meningitis, viral meningitis, there's a vaccine that you can take. All right, so this is histology of the cross-section of the spinal cord. So take a look at this for labs. You can see the sulcus, you can see the fissure, the anterior median fissures here, central canal. Look at that nice butterfly. So that's gray matter. You can actually see the horns. So you can see a posterior horn, anterior horn. Dorsal, you can see the roots. So let's take a look at the roots. So let's do those in yellow. So dorsal root ganglion is going to look nice and big, and that's dorsal root coming in. What is that information? Sensory. Beautiful. And then coming out, motor. Ventral root's kind of hard to see, to be honest, on histologically. Okay. Central canal. I think we did great. Commissure. Where's the commissure? Remember, the gray commissures, they go from one side to the other. You'll see commissures in your future. There's more commissures coming in the brain. All right, we won't be naming these tracts. We will not be naming these tracts. Okay, spinal cord injuries. Remember, any of that gray matter, any of those little cell bodies that get injured, anything below that will have paralysis because those will not be sending the information below that or receiving the sensory information below that. Now you can have paralysis, but still have sensation. So you can have tracts damaged on one side of the spinal cord and not on the other. It's an interesting step if we want to talk about this a little bit more, but it kind of goes beyond our class, but it's still very interesting how you can have paralysis, but still have sensation. So motor information is not working, but the sensory is, or you can have sensory information still working. So information from the PNS, the CNS, still, those cell bodies are still alive, but you had damage to the motor part, or either way, vice versa. Okay. I don't see this in our notes, but it's in your lab, so we're gonna do it. So just like how we wrap muscles, we wrap nerves. So this is out in your PNS. Nerves are wrapped with an epineurium, a perineurium, and an endoneurium. So epi is around the whole nerve. Your radial nerve is right here. That's what you use to take, you use your radial artery to take someone's pulse. Your radial nerve's right there. Okay, so remember where your radius is. You have a radial nerve there. So nerves, you have a whole bunch of nerves that you'll be learning in lab. It's wrapped, that radial nerve is wrapped with epineurium. Okay, so it's wrapped a whole thing, it's connective tissue. And then perineurium wraps bundles of nerves, or bundles of axons, sorry. I mean to say nerves. Bundles of axons, that's peri, okay? And then individuals that are wrapped, oh boy, individual axons are wrapped with endoneurium. Okay, that's for lab. Beautiful. We did ganglion and posterior root or dorsal root ganglion, either one's fine. Just to wrap it up, we have 31 pairs of spinal nerves. What page is that on? Doesn't matter. 31 pairs of spinal nerves. They're mixed. What do I mean? Sensory and motor. They have both. Okay, those are those common spinal nerves. 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral. You do have a coccygeal. I'm not going to ask you that, but anyway, you have one that's very deep, and it probably innervates the genitalia. Is probably what I'm guessing. I'm not sure. Okay, perfect. Keep going. Keep going. Don't give up. All right. Now we're going to, this is a little complex, but you got it. So don't worry. Okay. I wish this was bigger. That's okay. So here's your spinal cord, and we're going to go out from your spinal cord, and we're going to do, we've got the 2 roots in pink. Here's the 2 roots in pink. When those 2 roots come together, what do we call it? Common spinal nerve. That's in blue. Common spinal nerve is where they come together, right? Right there. There's your common spinal nerve. There it is. Okay. The common spinal nerve, as soon as we're out in the CN, or sorry, we're out in the PNS now. Okay. It's going to split off. It's going to split off into 3 chunks, 3 little cords. Okay. These are called rami, individual ramus. So it's going to split off into the anterior ramus, the posterior ramus, that's 2. And this last one, where is it? Oh, it's over here. They just didn't mark it. And this third one, it looks like there's 2 things coming off. This third one, we call it the communicating ramus, So on the other side, same thing, communicating, dorsal, and ventral. Okay, so you've got 3 things coming off your spinal nerve. They're going to go to 3 different places. Yes, you have to know this. Where are they going to go? Where are they going to go? The communicating ramus or communicating rami are going to go to your viscera, to your heart, and your viscera are all your organs, right? Your heart, your stomach, and your pancreas and your spleen. They're going to go innervate them, do whatever they need to do there. Okay. Your your ventral ramus is it should look very large to you. It is, because this is going to go innervate all your skeletal muscles, all those muscles around your body and your arms and your legs and a bunch of muscles. So that's your ventral. Your dorsal looks thin because it just kind of innervates stuff in the body wall. Okay. Rami, dorsal, ventral, communicating. Don't worry about D till 232. You can do that in 232. Okay. We're already complicated. And what I want to say, and I wish it was on here, you've got the communicating, which you'll talk more about in 232. That's your viscera. What happens at your viscera? What happens with your heart? What happens with your stomach? You'll talk about that more. But right now, you just need to know you've got this communicating ramus that innervates, that goes to the viscera. Okay, cool. Leave it there for 232. The dorsal ramus, that just innervates the body wall. Cool, we're done. This ventral ramus is going to go on and innervate your body, right? Innervate all these skeletal muscles, innervate your glands, your sweat glands and stuff. So super important and thick. And what's going to happen if we could see where it goes? Like, let's just follow this particular dorsal, why did I say dorsal? This particular ventral ramus. Let's follow this one out. Okay, let's say we're kind of near our, we're like T1. We're in T1. T1. What's going to happen is there's a whole bunch of ventral rami. They're going to have, their rami are going to be coming together from a bunch of different spinal nerves. And this thing coming together is called a plexus, where they all come together. I know this is complicated. This is called a plexus. You only have a few plexus. I'm doing, I just did C5 to T1. So when they all come together again, this is called the brachial plexus. Guess where do you think this brachial plexus is going to go? So it's kind of a way to just hold together a whole bunch of rami. And these are nerves. These are nerves. So the brachial plexus will be here, and it's going to spread out, and it's going to be all the nerves of your arm. Okay, so the brachial plexus is from C5 to T1, it's like that innervates your arm. The cervical plexus is up here, C1 to C5, it innervates your head and neck. The lumbosacral plexus is both the lumbar plexus and sacral plexus. They innervate genitalia and lower limb, okay? So that was pretty complicated. So ask me about it if it feels weird, if you aren't sure in lab, okay? Because we'll go over it in lab too. I think we're done. I was trying to keep this to a half hour. Oh, chicken pox and looking at dermatomes. So, oh, here are the plexuses. Hold on, let's stop for a second. I love it. So we had ramus that went out and form a plexus. So there's a cervical plexus up top. That's C1 to C5 up here. Brachial plexus is C5 to T1. There's a lumbar plexus down below, somewhere right in here, and a sacral plexus somewhere down here. And what do they innervate? The brachial innervate the arm, cervical, head and neck. Now, there's individual nerves down here, right? And you'll be doing that in lab. There's individual nerves, like the radial nerve. Where's the radial nerve? Right here. Where's the ulnar nerve? Where's your ulna? Where's the brachial nerve? Right where your biceps brachii is, okay? So a lot of those nerves, you don't need to, where's your axillary nerve? That's a landmark that you know, your armpit. So a lot of these you already know, you don't need to learn these. You just want to go with what you already know. So where does the obturator nerve live? It goes right through the obturator foramen that you learned about on the hip when you were talking about the pelvis, okay? There's a femoral nerve. Where does it run? Right over the femur. So try not to reinvent the wheel on those nerves and use what you already know. Okay, good. Now for reflexes, I'm actually going to move over on. For reflexes, I'm actually going to cover reflexes in lab and leave it there. So you have on page 6, you just have a little bit about reflex arcs, and we will cover that in lab, and we're going to call it good. I hope it was about a half hour. Thank you for listening to your last video. Have a good day.